The luxurious conference room at Meridian Development fell silent as Abigail Hayes slid the archaeological survey report across the polished oak table. That worthless desert ranch you've been trying to buy is sitting on top of a historical document cache worth over $14 million, Mr. Harrington. CEO Richard Harrington's face drained of color as the historian continued. And the widow who bought it for $300 at the county auction, the same woman whose grandfather had that land stolen from her family 60 years ago, is now the only thing standing between you and the most significant historical find about the Western frontier era. The relentless Arizona sun beat down on the cracked earth of Redwood County, where nothing seemed to thrive except desperation and debt. For most local residents, another year of drought meant another step closer to financial ruin. But for Sarah Mitchell, this barren landscape represented something entirely different possibility. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow as she studied the property map spread across the hood of her worn-out station wagon. At 38, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had weathered both literal and figurative storms. Her calloused hands and determination-lined face told the story of someone who had never taken the easy path even when one was offered. "You sure about this, Sarah?" Deputy Martha Rodriguez asked, keys to the padlock gate dangling from her fingers. The older woman's expression conveyed equal parts concern and curiosity. "County's been trying to unload this place for years. Nothing but rattlesnakes and bad memories out here." "I'm sure," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the calm certainty that had become her trademark in the small community of Pinecrest, 15 miles east. $300 for 250 acres is a deal, even if it's just rocks and dirt." "It's your funeral," the deputy shrugged, unlocking the rusted chain that had kept trespassers off the abandoned Westbrook farm for nearly a decade. Though what a woman who's already struggling to make ends meet wants with this godforsaken patch is beyond me. As the gate swung open with a protesting groan, Sarah climbed back into her station wagon and drove onto the property that was now officially hers. 250 acres of seemingly worthless desert that had been seized for back taxes after its previous owner had abandoned it years earlier. The dilapidated ranch house stood like a sun-bleached skeleton on the horizon, its broken windows staring blankly at the approaching vehicle. Sarah parked and surveyed her new acquisition with eyes that saw possibility where others had seen only desolation. The purchase had raised eyebrows throughout Pinecrest, where Sarah was known as a practical, hardworking widow who had been struggling to keep her small bookstore, Frontier Pages, afloat since her husband David's death 3 years earlier in a construction accident. Why would such a sensible woman, especially one facing financial hardship, waste even $300 on this cursed property? The answer lay not in the present condition of the Westbrook farm, but in its history, a history intertwined with Sarah's own family in ways few people in Redwood County remembered. As she approached the abandoned ranch house, her mind drifted to the stories her grandfather had told her as a child, stories about this very land. "This place belonged to your great-grandfather once," Harold Mitchell had told a young Sarah during their evening walks around their modest home in Pinecrest. 300 acres of the most promising land in the county with the sweetest water from a deep artesian well, before the dispute of '62. "What happened to it?" Sarah had asked, always eager for her grandfather's tales of family history. Harold's face had darkened then the way it always did when touching on painful memories. "William Harrington happened to it. He owned the bank back then. When your great-grandfather couldn't prove his claim to the water rights, Harrington foreclosed faster than a rattlesnake strikes. Wouldn't even give him time to gather proof of the historical water deed." Those childhood stories had planted a seed in Sarah's mind, not of revenge but of restoration. When she'd seen the Westbrook farm listed in the county tax auction for a minimum bid of $300, it had felt like fate offering a chance to reclaim a piece of her family's legacy. Now, as she pushed open the creaking door of the abandoned ranch house, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the broken roof, Sarah felt a sense of connection to the past that transcended the property's current desolation. The interior was a chaotic museum of abandonment, broken furniture, scattered papers, and the ghostly outlines on walls where pictures had once hung. In what had once been the kitchen, a calendar from 2009 still clung stubbornly to the wall, marking the approximate time when the last owner had walked away. Sarah moved methodically through the house, assessing structural damage and mentally cataloging what could be salvaged versus what would need to be demolished. Her phone rang, breaking the eerie silence. It was Jack Sullivan, her childhood friend, and now the town's water resource specialist, calling to check on her first impression of the property. "How's the disaster site?" he asked after making sure she'd arrived safely. Jack had been the most vocal critic of Sarah's decision to purchase the Westbrook farm, his practical nature recoiling at what seemed the sentimental waste of resources she could ill afford. "Less disastrous than expected," Sarah replied, stepping onto the back porch to escape the stifling interior heat. "The main house needs work, but the bones are solid. Most of the outbuildings are still standing, and the land itself—" "The land itself," Jack pressed, knowing that no amount of salvageable buildings could justify the purchase if there was no water potential. Sarah's gaze swept across the barren landscape. "It's been neglected, but that doesn't mean it's dead. I'm heading out to check the old well locations now." "Just remember you've got the bookstore inventory order due on Friday," Jack reminded her. "And Ashley's science fair is tomorrow night. You promised to help her with her project tonight." "I'll be back in a few hours," Sarah assured him. "This is just a preliminary assessment." Her daughter Ashley, now 14, had been supportive of the ranch purchase, seeing it as an adventure rather than a financial risk. After ending the call, Sarah retrieved her water dowsing equipment from the car. While her neighbors saw her simply as a struggling widow and bookstore owner, her environmental science degree and 2 years working for the County Water Conservation Board had given her skills beyond running a small business. Her interest in the Westbrook farm wasn't just sentimental. She had studied the area's topographical maps and historical water surveys extensively before making her bid. The afternoon sun tracked across the sky as Sarah methodically checked the 2 wells marked on the property map. The first was, as expected, dried up and damaged beyond simple repair, a victim of both drought and neglect. But the second well, located in a depression behind a rocky outcropping, showed more promise. The old mechanical pump was seized with rust, but Sarah's testing equipment detected moisture at a depth that suggested the groundwater table might still be accessible. More intriguing was the soil composition around this area, unexpectedly different from the surrounding terrain in ways that made Sarah's scientific mind take notice. As she examined the old well structure more closely, Sarah noticed unusual stonework around its base, not the typical masonry she would expect from a simple water well. The stones were fitted together with remarkable precision, almost resembling the craftsmanship she had seen in historical preservation magazines covering Pony Express stations and early frontier outposts. Around 4:30, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle pulled Sarah's attention from her work. Shielding her eyes against the glare, she spotted a sleek black SUV navigating the rutted dirt road with obvious difficulty. The vehicle seemed comically out of place in these surroundings, like a penguin in the desert. The SUV came to a stop beside her station wagon, clouds of dust settling around its gleaming exterior. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 30s, her business attire as incongruous with the desolate landscape as her vehicle. She approached with confidence despite her impractical footwear, extending a hand as she reached Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Rebecca Morgan, Acquisitions Specialist for Meridian Development. I was hoping to catch you here." Sarah accepted the handshake with measured caution. "Didn't realize news traveled that fast. I've only owned this place for about 5 hours." Rebecca's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. "In my business, information about property transactions is valuable, particularly when those properties are of interest to my employers. And why would Meridian Development be interested in 250 acres of what everyone assures me is worthless desert?" Sarah asked, her tone casual, despite the sudden alertness she felt. "May I be frank, Mrs. Mitchell?" She didn't wait for permission. "Meridian Development that is planning a major historical tourism project connecting our desert heritage sites with our Southwestern Cultural Center. The most cost-effective route runs directly through this property." Sarah absorbed this information with outward calm that masked her racing thoughts. Meridian Development was the region's largest development company, having expanded dramatically under the leadership of Richard Harrington, son of the same banker who had foreclosed on her great-grandfather's property all those years ago. The coincidence seemed too precise to be chance. "We're prepared to make a generous offer," Rebecca continued, misinterpreting Sarah's silence as negotiation tactics. "$9,000, 30 times what you paid at auction just hours ago. A substantial profit for minimal investment." The offer confirmed Sarah's suspicion that something larger was at play. No corporation offered 30 times market value without compelling reason. That's certainly generous, Sarah replied carefully, but I bought this place with specific plans in mind. I'm not looking to flip it. Rebecca's professional demeanor slipped slightly, revealing momentary frustration before she recovered. Perhaps if you shared your plans, we could discuss how Meridian Development might help facilitate them on another property. $15,000 could purchase considerably more promising land elsewhere in the county. My plans are tied to this specific property, Sarah stated simply, but I appreciate Meridian's interest. If I reconsider, you'll be my first call. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. Rebecca handed her a business card with a practiced smile that didn't mask her disappointment. Please do think it over, Mrs. Mitchell. This offer won't remain open indefinitely. As the black SUV disappeared down the dirt road, kicking up dust that glowed orange in the setting sun, Sarah's mind worked through the implications of this unexpected visit. Why would a massive development corporation send a representative hours after her purchase? The proposed heritage tourism route explained their interest superficially, but not the urgency or the inflated offer. Sarah returned to the unusual stonework around the well, examining it more carefully in light of Meridian Development's interest. The craftsmanship seemed oddly sophisticated for a simple ranch well, with patterns that reminded her of historical structures she had seen in books about the Western frontier era. She made detailed photographs with her phone, planning to research the architectural style when she returned to Pinecrest. Rather than drive back that evening, Sarah decided to spend a little more time exploring. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the property, giving the landscape an almost mystical quality. As she walked the perimeter of what had once been a corral, something glinted in the dirt near the second well, a small metal object catching the last rays of sunlight. Kneeling down, Sarah brushed away decades of accumulated dust to reveal an old coin. Not just any coin, but what appeared to be a silver eagle dollar from the mid-1800s, its surface worn, but still showing distinctive features. The discovery sent her heart racing. Such a coin would be unusual in this area, and finding it near the peculiarly constructed well couldn't be coincidence. As darkness approached, Sarah reluctantly prepared to leave, carefully pocketing the coin and taking final photographs of the well structure. She needed to get home to help Ashley with her science project, as promised, but her mind was already planning tomorrow's return with proper tools to investigate further. Driving back to Pinecrest, Sarah's thoughts alternated between the coin, the unusual well construction, and Meridian Development's suspiciously generous offer. The pieces were forming a pattern that suggested the land held value beyond what was visible on the surface, value that somehow connected to her family's historical claim. Sarah arrived home to find Ashley waiting eagerly on their small porch, her science project materials spread across the living room floor. Despite her excitement about the ranch discoveries, Sarah kept her promises, spending the evening helping her daughter perfect her presentation on desert water conservation, ironically related to what she'd been investigating all day. Did you find anything cool at the old ranch? Ashley asked as they put the finishing touches on her display board. Sarah hesitated, then pulled out the silver eagle coin. Actually, I found something very interesting. Ashley's eyes widened as she examined the coin. Is this real? Like actually old? I think so, Sarah replied. I need to have someone look at it, but if it's authentic, it's from the 1850s. And that raises some very interesting questions about that land. Maybe there's buried treasure, Ashley suggested with the enthusiastic imagination of a 14-year-old, like in those adventure movies. Sarah smiled at her daughter's excitement. Probably not, but there might be historical significance we don't understand yet. And that might explain why Meridian Development suddenly offered me 30 times what I paid for the property today. Ashley's expression grew serious. You're not going to sell it, are you? It was Great-Grandpa Harold's family's land. No, Sarah assured her, but I am going to find out why they want it so badly. The following morning, after seeing Ashley off to school, Sarah opened her bookstore for a few hours before her scheduled appointment with Professor Thomas Bennett at Redwood County Community College. As a history professor specializing in Western frontier history, he was the perfect person to evaluate the coin and discuss the unusual well structure. The bookstore, Frontier Pages, was Sarah's livelihood, a small but cherished business in downtown Pinecrest that specialized in regional history and literature alongside popular bestsellers. David had helped her open it 7 years ago, fulfilling her lifelong dream. Since his death, keeping it afloat had been a constant struggle against chain stores and online competition, but it remained the heart of her daily life and her connection to the community. Jack stopped by mid-morning, clearly still concerned about her purchase. "So, after sleeping on it, have you come to your senses about that money pit?" Sarah hesitated, then showed him the photographs of the well structure and the silver eagle coin. "Actually, I found something that might explain a few things." Jack examined the images with growing interest. "This doesn't look like a standard ranch well. The stonework is different, almost like the old Pony Express station structures." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "And I found this coin nearby." She showed him the silver eagle. "That's why Meridian Development sent someone with an offer 5 hours after I bought the place. They know something about this property that most people don't." Jack whistled softly. "Meridian Development already made an offer. How much?" "9,000, and then raised to 15,000 when I declined." "That's 50 times what you paid," Jack observed. "Most people would take that money and run." "Most people don't have a family connection to that land," Sarah replied. "And most people wouldn't be suspicious about why a major development corporation is so eager to acquire a supposedly worthless desert property." At noon, Sarah left her assistant in charge of the bookstore and drove to the community college with her findings. Professor Bennett received her in his cluttered office walls lined with maps and historical artifacts from throughout the Southwest. At 65, he combined academic knowledge with practical field experience, making him respected by both scholars and local history enthusiasts. "Mrs. Mitchell, what an interesting discovery," he remarked after examining the coin carefully under his desk magnifier. "This is indeed a silver eagle dollar, likely from 1857, based on the wear pattern and design elements. Not something one typically finds in Redwood County." "Is it valuable?" Sarah asked, though that wasn't her primary concern. "In itself, a few hundred, perhaps, depending on condition and rarity," the professor replied. "But the historical context of where you found it could be far more significant." He studied the photographs of the well structure with growing excitement. This stonework shows distinctive construction techniques from the Western frontier period. The pattern here is particularly interesting, similar to what we see in certain Pony Express stations and frontier outposts. The specific arrangement of these cornerstone pieces was sometimes used as a marker for safe houses or storage locations. "Storage locations?" Sarah asked, the word triggering both curiosity and a memory of her grandfather's stories. "Yes, secure caches," Bennett explained. "During the Western expansion period, stagecoach companies, mail carriers, and military expeditions would sometimes create hidden storage for valuables, important documents, or emergency supplies, especially in remote areas or during times of conflict." The professor pulled a book from his shelves and turned to a marked page showing similar stonework. "This pattern here, the specific arrangement of these cornerstone pieces, was sometimes used as a marker for such locations. It's a theory among some historians that these markers indicated something hidden nearby or even beneath." Sarah's heart raced as connections formed in her mind. "My grandfather used to tell stories about our family land having hidden value that was greater than water in the desert. I always thought he was speaking metaphorically about the water rights." Professor Bennett leaned forward, his academic interest fully engaged. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think your property merits proper archaeological investigation. If you found one coin, there could be more. And if that well structure is what I suspect, it could indicate something of historical significance." "Meridian Development seems to think so too," Sarah replied, explaining their urgent interest in the property. The professor's expression darkened. "Richard Harrington's company has been buying up properties with historical significance throughout the region, developing some and keeping others locked away from research access. Many in the historical community have concerns about their practices." Before departing, Professor Bennett arranged to visit the property the following day with proper documentation equipment. He also recommended that Sarah contact the State Historical Preservation Office to register her initial findings, which could provide some protection against development pressures. Driving back to Pinecrest, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. If the well structure truly marked a frontier-era cache, its historical significance would extend far beyond monetary value. It could reshape understanding of Western expansion routes in the region and explain why her great-grandfather had fought so hard to maintain ownership despite the apparent worthlessness of the land. When Sarah arrived at the bookstore, she found Jack waiting with an expression that suggested important news. "I did some digging into Meridian Development's recent projects," he said once they were alone in the back office. "They've been systematically acquiring properties along the old Pony Express route through the county, sites that might have historical significance." "What for?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to form a theory. "Officially for their heritage tourism project," Jack replied. "But there are rumors they've been conducting private archaeological excavations before developing the properties, removing artifacts without proper documentation or academic oversight. The implications were disturbing, a corporation potentially exploiting historical treasures for private gain rather than preservation and study." It added another dimension to Sarah's determination to understand what lay beneath her newly acquired property. "There's something else," Jack added with clear concern. "Richard Harrington himself was asking questions at the county records office about your deed transfer. The CEO doesn't typically involve himself in routine property acquisitions." This detail heightened Sarah's suspicions further. The CEO's direct involvement suggested the property held importance beyond a mere convenient tourism route. "Any idea why he'd take such a personal interest?" Jack studied her for a moment before responding. "There have been rumors for years about Harrington family records, private maps and documents relating to Western frontier expeditions that William Harrington acquired during the banking foreclosures of the 1960s. Some say the family has been quietly searching for something specific across these properties." After closing the bookstore, Sarah attended Ashley's science fair, proudly watching as her daughter confidently explained desert water conservation techniques to judges and visitors. Despite the excitement of the day's discoveries, she remained present for this important moment in her daughter's life, her determination to provide stability reinforced by the memory of David's support for both of them. That evening, as Ashley excitedly shared the news that her project had won second place, Sarah's phone rang, unknown number that turned out to be Rebecca Morgan from Meridian Development. "Mrs. Mitchell, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." The acquisitions specialist began with practiced courtesy. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation and inform you that Meridian Development is prepared to increase our offer to $25,000 for immediate purchase of the Westbrook Farm property." The dramatic escalation from the previous day's offer confirmed Sarah's growing suspicion about the property's hidden value. "That's quite an increase for 24 hours, she observed, keeping her tone neutral despite her racing thoughts. "Mr. Harrington has authorized me to expedite this acquisition," Rebecca replied, a new urgency evident in her voice. "We can complete the paperwork tomorrow morning if you're amenable." "I appreciate Meridian's continued interest," Sarah responded carefully. "But as I mentioned yesterday, I have specific plans for the property that prevent me from considering a sale at this time." And there was a pause before Rebecca continued, her professional tone slipping slightly. "Mrs. Mitchell, I feel I should mention that development projects often face unexpected complications: water access restrictions, environmental reviews, historical preservation claims. It would be unfortunate if your plans encountered such obstacles." The thinly veiled threat only strengthened Sarah's resolve. "Thank you for the information, Miss Morgan. I'll keep it in mind." After ending the call, Sarah shared the latest development with Ashley, whose eyes widened at the increased offer. $25,000, Mom. That's like a lot of money. We could fix the roof and get you a new car." "It is a lot of money," Sarah acknowledged, "which makes me even more certain there's something valuable about that property that they don't want us to discover for ourselves." The next morning, Sarah opened the bookstore early, planning to meet Professor Bennett at the ranch in the afternoon. As she arranged a new display of Southwestern history books, she noticed a black town car pull up outside. From it emerged a man whose bearing announced wealth and power before he even entered. Richard Harrington himself, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed as out of place in small-town Pinecrest as Rebecca's heels had been in the desert. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, surveying the modest bookstore with the measured assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating assets rather than browsing titles. At 60, Harrington carried himself with the precise blend of charm and intimidation that had built his company into a regional powerhouse. "Mrs. Mitchell," he greeted her with practiced cordiality that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "A charming establishment. I see why you might be reluctant to shift your focus to property development." "Mr. Harrington," Sarah acknowledged, continuing to arrange books with deliberate calm, I'm surprised the CEO of Meridian Development makes personal visits regarding routine property acquisitions. A tight smile crossed his features. The Westbrook Farm acquisition has certain timelines that warrant my direct involvement. I understand Miss Morgan conveyed our revised offer. She did, Sarah confirmed, finally turning to face him directly. As I told her I'm not interested in selling. Harrington studied her with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to identifying leverage points. Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate sentimental attachments. I understand this property once belonged to your family before unfortunate circumstances led to its transfer. The deliberate reference to the historic connection between their families confirmed what Sarah had begun to suspect. Harrington knew exactly who she was in the property's significance to her family history. Sentiment is part of it, Sarah acknowledged. But I'm also curious why Meridian Development is so interested in land that's supposedly worthless. A tourism road is hardly worth $25,000 for a small section of access. Meridian Investments look beyond surface appearances, Harrington countered smoothly, and I'm prepared to increase our offer to $50,000 in recognition of your family's historical connection to this property. The significant escalation of the offer crystallized Sarah's suspicions more effectively than any archaeological evidence could have. And if I told you Professor Bennett believes there might be a frontier-era cache beneath the old well structure? For a brief moment, Harrington's composed facade cracked a flicker of calculation and concern crossing his features before the confident mask returned. Speculation based on a single old coin would be a risky basis for turning down a guaranteed return. Archaeological investigation costs tens of thousands of dollars with no certainty of results. Yet Meridian Development seems willing to pay well above market value to acquire this specific property, Sarah observed. That suggests your company has information beyond what's publicly available. Harrington studied her with new intensity, reassessing the Widow bookstore owner he had clearly underestimated. I'll be direct, Mrs. Mitchell. Meridian Development conducted historical research on this region 3 years ago. The results suggested potential significance worth investigating. The most promising indicators were on this property. The same property that once belonged to my family before your father foreclosed on it. Sarah noted the historical connections suddenly taking on new significance. Ancient history, Harrington dismissed with a wave of his hand. Business decisions from another era. My interest is purely in current opportunities. He paused, recalibrating his approach. $75,000, Mrs. Mitchell. Final offer contingent on immediate acceptance. The escalation from $9,000 to $75,000 in the space of a single day told Sarah everything she needed to know about the potential value hidden beneath her supposedly worthless land. I think I'll hold on to it for now, she replied calmly, what my own exploration reveals. Harrington's expression hardened, the pretense of friendly negotiation evaporating. Individual property owners rarely have the resources to properly develop historical discoveries, Mrs. Mitchell. The expertise, the preservation requirements, the security considerations, they're prohibitive for someone in your position. Perhaps, Sarah acknowledged, but I have something you apparently want quite badly. That creates options I didn't have yesterday. As Harrington returned to his town car, the tension in his posture revealed the failed negotiation had unsettled him more than he wanted to show. Before departing, he turned back with one final comment. Consider carefully before you proceed, Mrs. Mitchell. Historical exploration is a complex undertaking with many potential complications, particularly for newcomers. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as the town car pulled away, leaving Sarah with the certainty that her $300 purchase had placed her at the center of something far more significant than a simple property dispute. The worthless desert ranch acquired for sentimental reasons now represented not just potential wealth, but a chance to uncover historical truth and perhaps balance an old injustice. What neither Sarah nor Richard Harrington could have anticipated was how quickly events would escalate, nor the shocking discoveries that lay not just beneath the sun-baked soil of the Westbrook farm, but in the forgotten records of a past that would soon return to change everything. The small conference room at Redwood County Community College fell silent as Professor Thomas Bennett completed his presentation based on the ground-penetrating radar results. Based on these preliminary findings, we're looking at what appears to be a frontier-era cache, potentially containing artifacts and documents worth millions, to historians and collectors alike. He turned to Sarah, whose composed expression masked her internal shock. And that's just from our initial GPR scans of the eastern section where the well is located. The formation likely extends further. 3 days had passed since Sarah's confrontation with Richard Harrington in her bookstore. Those days had been a whirlwind of activity as she leveraged every professional connection and resource at her disposal to understand exactly what lay beneath her $300 purchase. The morning after Harrington's visit, Sarah had met with her longtime friend and attorney, Diana Gonzalez, in the modest law office that served most of Pinecrest's small business community. "Let me get this straight," Diana had said, leaning back in her worn leather chair. "You bought an abandoned ranch for $300, and the next day the CEO of Meridian Development personally offered you $75,000 for it." Her expression reflected equal parts amazement and concern. "And you believe there's a frontier-era treasure cache under the property based on preliminary findings from Professor Bennett. His ground-penetrating radar shows anomalies consistent with a man-made underground structure," Sarah confirmed. "And Harrington essentially admitted their historical research identified something significant 3 years ago." Diana whistled softly. "If Meridian's internal valuation justified a $75,000 offer on day 2, we're talking about potential historical value far beyond that." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "But Sarah, documenting and preserving a historical find requires resources beyond what most individual property owners can access. Harrington wasn't wrong about that." "I'm not looking to become a treasure hunter," Sarah replied, "but I need to understand the full historical significance of what I'm sitting on before making any decisions. And I need legal protection while I figure it out." Diana had nodded immediately, grasping the implied threat in Harrington's parting words. "I'll file for expedited historical site designation with the State Historic Preservation Office and get a cease and desist order preventing any unauthorized access to your property. We should also look into the history of that land more carefully, particularly the foreclosure that took it from your family." That conversation had set in motion a dual investigation, archaeological assessment of the potential cache, and historical examination of the property's complicated past. For the archaeological work, Professor Bennett had assembled a small team of experts, willing to work discreetly using the community college's resources, supplemented by equipment borrowed from the state university. The historical investigation had proven equally revealing, though, in ways neither Sarah nor Diana had anticipated. The county archives contained some interesting discrepancies regarding the 1962 foreclosure, Diana reported during their second meeting. "The water rights your great-grandfather claimed existed are referenced in several earlier documents, but mysteriously vanished from the final foreclosure proceedings. There's evidence suggesting William Harrington may have deliberately suppressed documentation of those rights." "You're saying the foreclosure was fraudulent?" Sarah had asked, the implications stirring both anger and vindication for her grandfather's long-held bitterness. "Not provably fraudulent after 60 years, Diana cautioned, "but ethically questionable at minimum. William Harrington used the water rights dispute as an opportunity to acquire potentially valuable property through technical default, rather than acknowledging documented historical claims." This historical context added layers to Sarah's increasingly complex situation. What had begun as a sentimental purchase to reclaim family legacy now represented both potential historical treasure and possible justice for her family's past. Now, 3 days later, the scientific assessment had reached its preliminary conclusion in the community college conference room, where Professor Bennett presented his findings to Sarah, Diana, and Jack. "A frontier-era cache," Jack repeated the concept, clearly difficult to process. "Like an actual treasure vault from the 1860s. Not treasure in the traditional sense of gold and jewels." Professor Bennett clarified, though such caches often contain valuable coins, like the one Mrs. Mitchell found. More significantly, they served as secure storage for historical documents, maps, and culturally significant items, particularly during periods when frontier outposts feared attack or needed to preserve their most important possessions. "Which explains Harrington's increasingly aggressive tactics," Diana added grimly. She slid a document across the table to Sarah. "Meridian Development filed a petition yesterday challenging the auction process that transferred ownership to you. They're claiming insufficient public notice and improper minimum bid valuation." "They won't win on those grounds," Sarah said with confidence that surprised the others. I checked the legal notifications personally before bidding. They met all statutory requirements for a tax auction. Diana nodded. Agreed, but legal merit isn't always the point with these maneuvers. They're trying to cloud your title and create uncertainty while applying pressure from multiple angles. Like the county inspector who showed up yesterday claiming there was a water contamination concern near my property, Sarah asked. And the sudden interest in surveying the access road for maintenance, Jack added. Classic corporate pressure tactics, Diana confirmed. They're hoping you'll decide the legal hassle isn't worth it and accept their offer, which I'm guessing will increase significantly now that Professor Bennett has confirmed the potential historical fine. Sarah's phone vibrated with an incoming text from Deputy Rodriguez. Meridian Development trucks heading toward Westbrook Farm. Said they have survey permission from county. Thought you should know. We need to get out there, Sarah said, showing the others the message. They're making a move. The drive to the Westbrook Farm took 30 minutes at speeds that stretched rural highway safety margins. As they approached the access road, they spotted two white trucks with Meridian Development logos parked near the gate, which now sported a brand new chain and padlock different from the one Sarah had installed. Deputy Rodriguez's patrol car was already on scene, the older woman standing between the corporate vehicles and the gate with the patient stance of someone accustomed to diffusing tense situations. Afternoon, Sarah, the deputy greeted as they pulled up. These gentlemen seem to have misunderstood county access regulations. Three men in Meridian Development uniforms stood near their trucks, equipment cases visible in the open truck beds. The apparent leader stepped forward with professional confidence that faltered slightly at Diana's appearance. Mrs. Mitchell, I presume I'm Thomas Weber, Senior Archaeological Technician for Meridian Development. He held up an official-looking document. We have county authorization to conduct historical assessment along the proposed heritage tourism corridor that crosses this property. Diana intercepted the document before Sarah could respond. This is a general archaeological survey permit for county roads and public easements, she observed after a quick review. It doesn't authorize access to private property without owner consent. Weber's confident expression wavered further. The county administrator assured us this permit covered necessary access. The county administrator doesn't have authority to grant access to private property. Deputy Rodriguez interrupted mildly. Something I explained when I found these gentlemen cutting your lock, Sarah. You cut my lock, Sarah asked, her normally calm demeanor showing rare signs of anger. We replaced it with a new one, Weber offered weakly, holding out a key. We were instructed to secure the site after conducting our survey. Instructed by whom? Diana pressed. Weber's hesitation spoke volumes. Our operations supervisor relayed instructions from management. Let me guess, Sarah said, management being Richard Harrington himself. The technician's uncomfortable shift was confirmation enough. Diana handed the permit back with practiced professionalism that didn't mask her satisfaction. Please inform Mr. Harrington that unauthorized access to this property constitutes criminal trespass. Any future attempts will result in immediate legal action against both the individuals involved and Meridian Development as a corporate entity. As the Meridian Development employees retreated to their vehicles, Deputy Rodriguez cut off the unauthorized lock and replaced it with Sarah's original. They're getting desperate, she observed. Switching from legal maneuvers to direct action suggests they're running out of patience or time. Or both. The question is, why now? What's changed in their timeline? Diana wondered. The answer arrived the following morning in the form of a regional business newsletter that featured a small announcement. Meridian Development finalizes arrangements for Southwestern Heritage Trail Project. Construction to begin within 45 days. That's their pressure point, Jack observed when Sarah showed him the article at the bookstore. They've committed to construction schedules with penalties for delays. Without access through your property, they'd have to reroute around several geographical obstacles, increasing costs and pushing back their timeline. No wonder Harrington's getting aggressive, Sarah added, the pieces falling into place. This gives us leverage but also increases risk, Diana noted. A corporation facing deadline pressure has motivation to pursue all available options, legal and otherwise. The attorney's warning proved prescient when Rebecca Morgan appeared at Sarah's bookstore later that afternoon, her corporate polish somewhat diminished by obvious stress. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm authorized to offer you $100,000 for immediate sale of the Westbrook Farm property. she stated without preamble. Over 300 times your investment, with expedited closing and all transfer costs covered by Meridian Development. The dramatic increase from the previous $75,000 offer confirmed Diana's assessment of Meridian's growing desperation. Sarah received the offer with outward calm that betrayed none of her internal calculation. That's a significant improvement on your last proposal. We recognize the property's importance to our timeline, Rebecca acknowledged. This offer represents fair market value with substantial premium for expedited transfer. Fair market value for land potentially containing frontier-era artifacts worth millions to historians and collectors. Sarah countered, watching her reaction carefully. Rebecca's professional composure cracked momentarily, confirming she hadn't been informed of Sarah's knowledge regarding the potential cash. "I'm not authorized to discuss speculative assessments," she recovered. "This offer relates specifically to the heritage tourism access requirements." "I see," Sarah replied. "Please inform Mr. Harrington that I appreciate Meridian Development's improved offer, but remain uninterested in selling at this time." After Rebecca departed, Sarah drove out to the Westbrook farm for what had become her daily property check. The attempted trespass by Meridian's survey team had heightened her vigilance, with Jack and several trusted friends taking turns monitoring the property throughout the day. The ranch house had become Sarah's primary focus during these visits. While the potential treasure commanded most attention, her original interest in reclaiming family legacy hadn't diminished. She had begun clearing decades of accumulated debris, salvaging what could be preserved while documenting the property's condition. In what had once been a storage room beneath the main staircase, Sarah had discovered a cache of old documents sealed in a rusted metal box, records, apparently hidden intentionally before the foreclosure. These papers had revealed disturbing details about William Harrington's systematic manipulation of water rights claims for multiple families during the 1960s, drought creating a pattern of predatory foreclosures that had consolidated vast tracts of land under bank ownership for pennies on the dollar. Most significantly, the documents included a historical survey report from 1961 suggesting potential archaeological significance throughout the region, with the Mitchell property marked as particularly promising. The implications were staggering. William Harrington had potentially orchestrated the foreclosure with knowledge of historical treasures beneath the struggling ranch. This historical context transformed the current conflict with Richard Harrington from simple business negotiation into something with deeper moral implications. If the father had acquired the land through questionable means, with knowledge of its hidden value, the son's desperate attempts to regain control carried the weight of generational injustice. As Sarah sorted through more documents in the dilapidated storage room, the sound of approaching vehicles drew her attention. Through the dusty window, she spotted Deputy Rodriguez's patrol car, followed by an unfamiliar black sedan with government plates. Outside, Sarah found the deputy accompanied by a serious-looking woman in a business suit. "Sarah, this is Kate Turner from the State Attorney General's office," Rodriguez introduced. "She'd like to speak with you about Meridian Development and your property." The unexpected appearance of a state prosecutor elevated the situation beyond anything Sarah had anticipated. "Of course," she responded, leading them to the relatively stable front porch where she had placed salvaged chairs, "though I'm not sure how I can help the Attorney General's office." Kate Turner studied her with the measured assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating credibility. "Mrs. Mitchell, our office has been investigating Meridian Development for potential violations of state historical preservation laws and improper influence over county officials. Your recent interactions with the company have intersected with our ongoing investigation. I've had some unusual experiences with it since purchasing this property," Sarah acknowledged cautiously. "So I've heard, Baron," Turner replied. "Deputy Rodriguez contacted our office after yesterday's trespassing incident, which appears to connect to other patterns we've been monitoring." She removed a file from her briefcase. "Are you aware that the county administrator who authorized Meridian's archaeological survey permit has received substantial consulting fees from Harrington Family Foundations over the past 3 years?" Sarah exchanged glances with Deputy Rodriguez, whose expression suggested this was new information to her as well. "I wasn't aware of that connection. We've been building a case concerning Meridian's methods of securing access to historically significant properties," Turner continued. Your situation represents a particularly clear example of their escalating tactics when conventional approaches fail. The conversation that followed revealed an investigation far broader than Sarah's individual property dispute. Meridian Development's aggressive expansion under Richard Harrington had apparently involved systematic efforts to influence local officials, manipulate permit processes, and pressure reluctant landowners through questionable means. We believe your property represents special importance to Meridian, beyond simple tourism route access. Turner concluded after outlining the broader investigation. Their response to your purchase has been disproportionate to typical right-of-way negotiations. I might have insight into why, Sarah replied after brief consideration. She explained the potential frontier-era cache and the historical documents suggesting William Harrington's knowledge of archaeological significance before the 1962 foreclosure. Kate Turner's professional demeanor couldn't entirely mask her excitement at this new information. This adds significant dimension to our investigation. Would you be willing to share copies of these historical documents and Professor Bennett's preliminary findings? After the prosecutor departed with copies of both the historical records and the archaeological findings, Deputy Rodriguez remained behind. You just escalated the situation beyond anything Harrington will be prepared for, she observed. The AG's office has been looking for leverage against Meridian for years. You just handed them a case with both historical and current implications. I didn't start this fight, Sarah replied, but I won't back down from it either. Just watch your back, the deputy advised. Harrington won't take this lying down. The warning proved prophetic. The very next morning, Sarah awoke to urgent calls from 3 neighboring property owners. Overnight, Meridian Development had secured emergency permits to test soil composition in the area surrounding the Westbrook Farm permits that authorized immediate excavation operations within 500 feet of Sarah's property line. By noon, massive archaeological equipment had been positioned on adjacent properties with operations running 24 hours under emergency authorization. The official explanation involved potential cultural resource concerns, but the strategic positioning made the actual purpose clear. Meridian was attempting to access the potential cache from neighboring properties while creating continuous disruption for Sarah. They can't directly excavate onto your property from adjacent land, Diane explained during an emergency meeting at Sarah's house. That would constitute trespassing under state law, but they can make your life miserable with round-the-clock operations while collecting additional archaeological data about the potential cache's boundaries. And intimidating my neighbors, Sarah added. 3 have already called asking if I shouldn't just sell and end the disruption. Classic pressure tactics, Diane acknowledged grimly. They're trying to isolate you while gathering more information about exactly what they're fighting for. The situation escalated further that afternoon when Rebecca Morgan returned, this time accompanied by Meridian Development's chief legal counsel Bradford Reynolds, a silver-haired corporate attorney with a reputation for aggressive negotiation. Mrs. Mitchell, in light of recent developments, Meridian Development is prepared to make a final offer of $250,000 for immediate transfer of the Westbrook Farm property. Reynolds stated with cold efficiency, this represents our absolute maximum valuation considering all relevant factors. The 5-fold increase from Harrington's personal offer confirmed the corporation's growing desperation, an amount that would transform Sarah's financial situation and secure her and Ashley's future beyond anything she had imagined possible from her $300 investment. And if I decline? Sarah asked, curious about their prepared response. Reynolds' expression hardened. Then we proceed with all available legal remedies to resolve access requirements for our heritage tourism project. I should note that archaeological testing operations on adjacent properties will continue indefinitely under our emergency authorization. The impact on local quality of life would be unfortunate but necessary. The threat was barely veiled. Accept our offer or we'll make life unbearable for you and your neighbors while fighting you through every legal channel available. I'll need time to consider an offer of this magnitude, Sarah replied, revealing nothing of her actual reaction to either the amount or the implied threat. You have 48 hours, Reynolds stated flatly. After that, the offer expires permanently and we pursue alternative approaches to securing our interests. After they departed, Jack voiced what everyone was thinking. $250,000 would transform everything for you and Ashley. You could expand the bookstore, pay off your mortgage, establish a college fund, all from a $300 investment on a property you bought for sentimental reasons. And let Harrington complete what his father started, Sarah responded quietly, taking land through manipulation and pressure, knowing it contains value far beyond what's being offered. It's your decision, Jack acknowledged. But $250,000 is life-changing money for what started as a sentimental purchase. The following morning brought unexpected development when Kate Turner returned this time with additional personnel from the Attorney General's office, who began documenting Meridian's excavation operations on neighboring properties. "We found irregularities in their emergency authorization," Turner explained to Sarah as they watched the state officials photograph equipment positions. "The cultural resource concern they cited doesn't correspond to any reported data or testing results. We're suspending their operations pending full review." By mid-afternoon, Meridian's archaeological equipment stood silent, a significant victory, though likely temporary, given the corporation's resources and influence. The respite allowed Sarah to focus on a new development Professor Bennett had called with results from additional ground-penetrating radar that expanded their understanding of the potential cache. "The underground structure is larger than our initial assessment," he explained when Sarah arrived at his laboratory. "Based on these new scans, we're looking at what appears to be a chamber approximately 15 by 20 feet with what may be smaller adjoining spaces. If this is indeed a frontier-era cache, it could represent one of the most significant finds in southwestern archaeological history." The revised assessment transformed Meridian's seemingly generous $250,000 offer into something approaching exploitation. Even considering preservation costs and the academic rather than commercial value of such a find, the historical significance far outweighed the monetary offer. "Have you made a decision about their offer?" Professor Bennett asked, aware of the pressure Sarah faced. "Not yet," she admitted, though these findings certainly clarify the stakes involved. As Sarah drove back toward her home, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The caller identified himself as Dr. James Miller, senior archaeologist for Meridian Development. "Mrs. Mitchell, I believe we should meet," he said without preamble. "There are aspects to the situation you need to understand before making your final decision." The unexpected contact from within Meridian's organization raised immediate suspicion. "Why would a Meridian employee want to meet with me outside official channels?" "Because what's happening isn't right," Miller replied, surprising Sarah with his directness. "I've been with Meridian for 12 years. What Harrington is doing now crosses lines that shouldn't be crossed. There are things in my archaeological assessments that haven't been disclosed to you or to regulatory authorities." Intrigued despite her caution, Sarah agreed to meet at a cafe in neighboring Yucca Valley beyond Harrington's immediate sphere of influence. Upon arriving, she found Miller already seated in a corner booth, a man in his early 50s, with the weathered appearance of someone who spent considerable time in field excavations rather than corporate offices. "I'm risking my career by talking to you," Miller began, without preamble after Sarah joined him. "But I can't be part of what's happening anymore. Harrington is deliberately misrepresenting critical information about both the Heritage Tourism Project and the potential archaeological find under your property." "What kind of misrepresentation?" Sarah asked, studying the archaeologist carefully for signs of deception or manipulation. "The tourism route doesn't need to cross your property," Miller stated flatly. "There are two alternative routes that add minimal cost and actually reduce impact on other documented historical sites. Harrington rejected them specifically to create pretext for acquiring the Westbrook farm." "Because of the potential frontier-era cache," Sarah surmised. Miller nodded. "The site is significantly more important than you probably realize. My comprehensive assessment, which Harrington has kept strictly internal, indicates this isn't just any frontier cache. The configuration matches descriptions of a very specific missing historical collection, the Lost Pony Express archives." He slid a flash drive across the table. "These are my complete findings, including three-dimensional mapping of the entire underground structure. The Pony Express archives disappeared during territorial conflicts in the 1860s and were thought destroyed. If this is indeed that collection, we're talking about priceless historical documentation that could reshape our understanding of the entire Western expansion period in this region." Sarah absorbed this information with outward calm that masked her internal shock. Why would Harrington go to such lengths rather than simply acknowledging the historical significance and working through proper channels? "It's not just about historical value," Miller replied. It's about family legacy and control of the narrative. The Harrington family has built their reputation as regional historical authorities and benefactors. Their private collection of southwestern artifacts is renowned, though few question how many of those items were acquired through foreclosures, similar to what happened with your family's property. The archaeologist hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. I found documentation in our historical archives suggesting Meridian's interest in this property dates back to its founding. William Harrington apparently transferred the land to Meridian's predecessor company shortly after foreclosure, then back to private ownership, when initial archaeological techniques couldn't confirm the cache's location. The property has changed hands multiple times since then, but always with Meridian maintaining right of first refusal until the recent tax auction that transferred ownership to you without their knowledge. This revelation completed the picture Sarah had been assembling from fragmented historical documents. William Harrington had apparently orchestrated the foreclosure with specific knowledge of potential archaeological significance, then maintained corporate control through hidden ownership structures for decades. Harrington isn't just trying to acquire valuable property, Miller concluded. He's attempting to protect a family secret that could have significant legal and reputational implications if fully exposed. Your purchase disrupted decades of careful control. Following the formal dedication, Miller offered one final insight. Tomorrow morning, Harrington is meeting with the Meridian Development Board to discuss final resolution of the Westbrook Farm situation. Whatever he's planning goes beyond the offer you've received. Be careful. Driving back toward Pinecrest, Sarah's mind processed the implications of Miller's revelations. The situation had evolved beyond negotiation over property value into something with moral and potentially legal dimensions that transcended simple business transaction. Her deliberation was interrupted by an urgent call from Deputy Rodriguez. Sarah, there's a fire at the Westbrook Farm. Fire department is responding, but the old house is fully engaged. You need to get out here. Arriving at her property 30 minutes later, Sarah found the ranch house consumed by flames despite the rural fire department's efforts to contain the blaze. Deputy Rodriguez approached as Sarah exited, her car expression grim beneath her official composure. This wasn't accidental, the deputy stated without preamble. Fire chief found evidence of accelerant around the perimeter. Someone wanted this place burned to the ground. As Sarah watched the historical structure collapse in flames, the timing seemed too convenient to be coincidence. The documents she had discovered, evidence of William Harrington's questionable foreclosure practices and knowledge of archaeological significance, were now ash, along with any other historical evidence the building might have contained. I made copies of the most important documents, Sarah said more to herself than the deputy, but anything else that might have been hidden there is gone forever. This crosses a line from corporate pressure tactics to criminal activity, Rodriguez observed. Arson investigation will be thorough with state authorities involved, given the circumstances. As emergency responders continued battling the fire, Sarah's phone rang. Richard Harrington himself, calling directly for the first time since their confrontation in the bookstore. Mrs. Mitchell, I've just been informed about the unfortunate fire at the ranch house. Harrington's voice carried practiced concern that didn't mask underlying tension. Truly regrettable loss of historical structure. This emphasizes the vulnerability of isolated properties to unfortunate incidents. The implied threat beneath the superficial sympathy was unmistakable. Are you calling to express condolences or deliver a message, Mr. Harrington? Sarah asked, maintaining composure despite rising anger. Merely to remind you that our offer expires tomorrow, Harrington replied smoothly. Given tonight's unfortunate development, perhaps reconsideration is appropriate. $250,000 provides opportunity to start fresh without further complications. I'll let you know my decision tomorrow, Sarah responded, revealing nothing of her internal reaction to this thinly veiled intimidation. As she ended the call, Sarah surveyed the burning remains of the ranch house with newfound clarity. What had begun as sentimental reclamation of family legacy had evolved into something approaching moral obligation. The property represented not just potential historical discovery, but opportunity to correct injustice perpetuated across generations. With resolute determination, Sarah made 3 calls before leaving the property, first to Diana, then to Kate Turner at the Attorney General's office, and finally to Dr. James Miller. By morning, the pieces would be in place for a confrontation beyond anything Richard Harrington had anticipated, when he first learned of Sarah's modest $300 purchase. The executive boardroom of Meridian Development fell silent as Dr. James Miller slid the complete archaeological survey report across the polished conference table. The Pony Express archives beneath the Westbrook farm are worth over $14 million to historical institutions and would qualify for immediate National Historical Landmark status. Not the $3 million in private collection value you've been reporting to the board, Miller stated firmly. CEO Richard Harrington's face drained of color as his senior archaeologist continued. And I've provided copies of these findings along with documentation of your father's fraudulent foreclosure to both Mrs. Mitchell and the State Attorney General's office. This decades-long deception ends today. The morning after the ranch house fire, Sarah arrived at the bookstore before dawn. Sleep had been impossible following the previous night's events, her mind working through implications and possibilities with relentless intensity. By first light, she had formulated an approach that went beyond simple negotiation towards something approaching justice, not just for herself, but for the community that had suffered under the Harrington family's influence for generations. Jack found her in the office reviewing documents they had fortunately kept at her home rather than the now destroyed ranch house. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed, placing a much-needed cup of coffee beside her. "Too much to process," Sarah acknowledged, "but I think I see a path forward that goes beyond accepting or rejecting Harrington's offer." Her explanation was interrupted by Diana's arrival, the attorney carrying several folders of legal documents prepared through the night. "Everything's ready," she confirmed, "though I still think you're taking an enormous risk with this approach." "Sometimes the right path isn't the safest one," Sarah replied, gathering the materials for the meeting ahead. "The Harringtons have been manipulating this community for decades. Accepting their money, even $250,000, would make me complicit in that system." The Meridian Development headquarters dominated downtown Redwood City, its 15-story glass tower, casting long morning shadows across surrounding buildings. In the executive parking area, Richard Harrington emerged from his Mercedes Confidence, evident in every measured movement despite the pressure he faced. Today's board meeting would either cement his control over the Westbrook farm situation or raise uncomfortable questions about his handling of the increasingly complicated acquisition. Bradford Reynolds, the company's chief legal counsel, met him at the executive elevator. "The board's already assembled," he reported. "Several members have expressed concern about the escalating situation with the Mitchell property. They'll be satisfied once I present our resolution strategy," Harrington replied with practiced assurance. "The situation will be resolved by day's end." "There's something else," Reynolds added as the elevator ascended. Miller requested time at the beginning of the meeting to present updated archaeological findings. Said it's critical information the board needs before making any decisions. Harrington's expression tightened slightly. Miller has been increasingly problematic. Perhaps it's time to reevaluate his position after this project concludes. The executive boardroom occupied the tower's top floor, offering panoramic views of the surrounding region, a physical manifestation of Meridian Development's dominance of the local economy. The company's board members represented old money and influence throughout the state, many with family connections extending back generations alongside the Harringtons. As Harrington entered, conversations quieted respectfully. Despite recent concerns, his position as second-generation CEO carried substantial weight among people who valued legacy and tradition. He took his seat at the head of the table with practiced authority, nodding to Dr. Miller, who stood ready with presentation materials. "Before we address the Westbrook farm acquisition, Dr. Miller has updated archaeological findings to share." Harrington announced, his tone suggesting routine procedure rather than potentially consequential revelation. Miller connected his laptop to the presentation system with deliberate calm that masked his internal tension. The senior archaeologist had spent 12 years building his reputation at Meridian Development, a career now balanced against ethical considerations he could no longer ignore. "My team has completed comprehensive analysis of the subterranean structure beneath the Westbrook farm property." Miller began displaying three-dimensional imaging. "Our initial assessment identified significant historical artifacts, but recent ground-penetrating radar and comparative analysis reveal a site substantially more important than previously reported to this board." The presentation that followed detailed not just the expanded size of the underground chamber, but its distinctive construction, features, and alignment with historical descriptions of the Lost Pony Express archives factors that dramatically increased its historical significance. Based on comparative analysis with similar documented finds, this represents potential historical value between $10 to $14 million to academic institutions with immeasurable cultural significance to indigenous communities and historical scholarship. Miller concluded, significantly higher than the 3 to 4 million estimate previously provided in acquisition briefings. Board member Olivia Washington, known for her direct approach, leaned forward. Why such dramatic discrepancy between initial estimates and current valuation? Before Miller could respond, Harrington intervened smoothly. Archaeological assessment is inherently iterative. Initial estimates are appropriately conservative until confirmed through additional testing. With respect, that doesn't explain this level of discrepancy, Miller countered with unexpected firmness. My comprehensive assessment was completed 2 weeks ago and submitted through appropriate channels. The findings I've just presented should have been available during previous board discussions. The challenge created palpable tension. Harrington's expression remained controlled despite the clear insubordination. Perhaps we can address internal communication procedures after resolving the more pressing acquisition matter. Mr. Reynolds has prepared updated ownership transfer documentation based on our latest offer. Before we proceed, Miller continued, ignoring the implicit instruction to conclude his presentation. There's additional historical context the board should consider. The boardroom door opened and all heads turned as Sarah Mitchell entered, followed by Diana Gonzalez, Kate Turner from the Attorney General's office, and Deputy Rodriguez. The unexpected appearance of this group created immediate disruption, with several board members exchanging concerned glances. What is the meaning of this interruption? Harrington demanded, rising from his seat with barely contained anger. I believe I can answer that. Kate Turner stepped forward, placing her credentials on the conference table. State Attorney General's office. We're here to present evidence regarding potentially criminal actions surrounding the Westbrook Farm property and historical artifacts. Given the timing of this board meeting and the recent arson at Mrs. Mitchell's property, we felt immediate intervention was warranted. The mention of arson sent a ripple of shock through the room. Several board members looked to Harrington with expressions ranging from concern to outright suspicion. These are serious allegations, Olivia Washington stated, addressing Turner directly. Do you have substantiating evidence? We do. Turner confirmed, including documentation from Dr. Miller regarding deliberate misrepresentation of archaeological findings, historical records showing systematic pattern of questionable foreclosures by William Harrington, targeting properties with potential historical significance, and preliminary forensic evidence from last night's fire, indicating arson with professional technique. Harrington's facade finally cracked his expression, revealing calculation rather than shock or denial, the reaction of a man assessing damage control options rather than someone falsely accused. These matters should be addressed through proper legal channels, Reynolds interjected, not through theatrical interruption of private corporate proceedings. Normally I would agree, Turner replied evenly. However, the timing of today's meeting immediately following destruction of historical evidence and coinciding with expiration of a coercive offer to Mrs. Mitchell creates exigent circumstances justifying immediate intervention. What exactly are you proposing? Washington asked, her tone suggesting she was addressing both Turner and Sarah rather than Harrington. Sarah stepped forward, placing her own documentation on the table. I'm not here to make accusations or demands. I'm here to propose a solution that addresses everyone's interests while preserving historical integrity. The directness of her approach caught even Harrington off guard. He had clearly expected recriminations rather than negotiation. The Westbrook Farm contains historical artifacts of national significance, Sarah continued. Rather than fighting over ownership or control, I'm proposing establishment of the Westbrook Heritage Partnership, a collaborative model combining Meridian's development expertise with academic oversight and community benefit. As Sarah outlined her vision, the board members' expressions transformed from skepticism to interest. Her proposal created framework for responsible excavation and preservation, while still allowing Meridian to develop their heritage tourism route under transparent oversight that would prevent exploitation or historical destruction. Most importantly, Sarah concluded, this approach transforms potential scandal into public relations opportunity. Instead of headlines about corporate exploitation and destruction of historical artifacts, Meridian becomes partner in preserving national heritage with appropriate recognition and branding benefits. The strategic brilliance of her approach was evident in the board members' reactions. She had offered Harrington face-saving exit from potentially devastating situation while simultaneously ensuring the historical artifacts would receive proper academic documentation and public access. Washington turned to Harrington. Your response to this proposal, Richard, trapped between his previous misrepresentations and the pragmatic solution before him, Harrington's legendary composure finally failed him. His expression revealed a man calculating desperate options against inevitable consequences. This proposal requires careful legal review, he stalled. The implications for our development timeline alone can be accommodated. Miller interrupted, displaying modified project plans already prepared. I've taken the liberty of incorporating potential partnership parameters into our development schedule. The route adjustment creates minimal delay while actually enhancing visitor experience through authorized archaeological viewing areas. The comprehensiveness of Miller's alternative plan confirmed he had been preparing for this confrontation for some time, likely since first discovering the true significance of the Westbrook Farm artifacts. I move we authorize exploratory implementation of Mrs. Mitchell's partnership proposal, Washington stated formally, pending detailed legal structuring to protect all parties' interests. The motion received immediate second from another board member, forcing Harrington into impossible position. To oppose would reveal prioritization of personal agenda over corporate benefit. To support would surrender control he had fought desperately to maintain. Before voting, Turner interjected, I should note that the Attorney General's office is prepared to suspend investigation into potential corporate malfeasance if good faith participation in the proposed partnership is established. Our primary interest is preservation of historical artifacts rather than punitive action. The implied threat beneath her professional tone was clear: cooperate with the partnership or face full investigation into both recent events and historical patterns dating back to William Harrington's era. As board members voted overwhelmingly to pursue the partnership approach, Sarah watched Harrington's face. His expression revealed a man experiencing something unfamiliar, the collapse of carefully constructed control. Beyond the immediate loss of authority, his eyes held recognition that decades of carefully maintained family narrative were unraveling before him. In that moment, standing in the boardroom of the empire his father had built, Richard Harrington finally understood what Sarah had recognized from the beginning, that some values transcend monetary calculation, and that legacy defined solely by acquisition inevitably crumbles against the weight of suppressed truth. What had begun with Sarah's $300 purchase of seemingly worthless desert would now transform not just her family's historical connection to the land, but an entire community's relationship with its buried past, a past that would finally be unearthed not for private collection, but for public understanding and shared benefit. As the board meeting concluded with formal authorization to pursue partnership development, Deputy Rodriguez quietly observed to Sarah, your grandfather would be proud. You didn't just reclaim the land, you're redefining what it means. 5 months after the dramatic confrontation in Meridian Development's boardroom, the morning sun crested over Westbrook Farm, illuminating a transformation that few in Redwood County could have imagined. What had once been desolate, neglected acreage now hummed with purposeful activity. White canvas tents housing archaeological teams dotted the eastern section. A temporary visitor platform overlooked the excavation site where the old well had stood. Construction crews worked on reinforcing access roads while water tankers sprayed down the dust to protect delicate artifacts being documented beneath specialized shelters. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the main excavation, watching as Professor Bennett supervised the careful removal of a wooden crate from the underground chamber that had remained sealed for over 150 years. The professor's weathered hands trembled slightly as he brushed away desert soil from brass fixtures that had retained their luster despite the passage of time. The preservation is remarkable, he said, his voice hushed with reverence. The cache was constructed with a natural ventilation system that maintains stable temperature and humidity while preventing moisture infiltration. They built this to last. Sarah nodded, still processing the magnitude of what they had discovered since the excavation began. The underground structure had indeed housed the long-lost Pony Express archives, but that was merely the beginning. As teams had carefully documented each level, they had uncovered a historical treasure trove that extended far beyond mail service records. Mrs. Mitchell called Dr. Miller, who had resigned from Meridian to serve as the partnership's lead archaeologist. "I think you'll want to see this one." He stood near a temporary conservation table where an item from the most recently opened container was being carefully cleaned and documented. Sarah crossed the excavation site, now divided into precise grid sections marked with stakes and string. Each artifact's position was being recorded with exacting precision, a stark contrast to the hasty extraction Meridian had originally planned. On the table lay a leather-bound ledger, its cover embossed with faded gold lettering. As a conservation specialist gently turned its pages with gloved hands, Sarah caught glimpses of handwritten entries, maps, and small sketches in the margins. "This appears to be a station master's personal journal," Dr. Miller explained, his eyes alight with the excitement that had energized the entire team since excavation began. Not just official records, but his observations about travelers, descriptions of notable events, even details about the Underground Railroad operations through this region. Sarah's breath caught. Underground Railroad, here in the Southwest. It was much less documented than the eastern routes. Professor Bennett joined them, carefully wiping dust from his glasses. But there were indeed freedom pathways through this territory. Many history books overlook the western extension of the Underground Railroad, but evidence has been emerging for years. This journal may provide the most comprehensive documentation yet discovered. The implications extended far beyond academic interest. If authenticated, these records would reshape understanding of Civil War-era resistance movements and freedom trails through the Southwest, adding dimension to American history that had remained obscured for generations. "There's more," Dr. Miller continued. "The journal contains entries about coordination with specific military units, including letters signed by Union officers regarding secret transport of intelligence. Some entries reference coded communications approved by A.L. himself." "Abraham Lincoln," Sarah asked, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "We can't confirm presidential authorization without expert verification," Bennett cautioned. "But the timing and context make it plausible. This station may have served as more than just a mail stop, possibly a key intelligence transfer point during the Civil War." As they spoke, Diana Gonzalez approached from the direction of the newly constructed Visitor Center, a modular building that served as temporary headquarters for the Westbrook Heritage Partnership. Her expression suggested important news. "The National Historical Society just confirmed," she announced. "They're sending their presidential artifacts authentication team next week. The Lincoln Presidential Library is sending a representative as well. Word is spreading through academic circles about the significance of what we found." Sarah took a moment to absorb the scale of what was unfolding on land she had purchased for $300 just months earlier. What had begun as personal connection to family history had expanded into discovery with national historical significance, one that would permanently alter understanding of Western territorial development during one of America's most consequential periods. The Westbrook Heritage Partnership itself had evolved from desperate compromise into pioneering collaboration that was already drawing attention from preservation organizations across the country. The legal structure Diana had crafted created balanced governance between commercial, academic, and community interests, ensuring no single entity could control or exploit the discoveries. "How's the visitor center coming along?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the modular building. "Ahead of schedule," Diana replied. "The temporary facility is already handling more daily visitors than we anticipated. The permanent structure designs were approved yesterday, with groundbreaking scheduled for next month." The partnership's development had not been without challenges. Initial weeks after the board meeting had required delicate negotiation to transform conceptual agreement into functional reality. Richard Harrington had maintained formal cooperation while attempting to insert controlling mechanisms into governance documents, maneuvers Diana had systematically identified and neutralized. More surprisingly, several Meridian board members, led by Olivia Washington, had demonstrated genuine commitment to the partnership model, recognizing both its public relations value and potential for sustainable development that enhanced rather than exploited historical resources. Inside the Visitor Center, interactive displays already shared preliminary findings with the public, while glass cases exhibited replicas of key artifacts the originals secured in conservation facilities. Local high school students served as volunteer guides, receiving academic credit for participation in living history education. Sarah spotted Ashley among them, enthusiastically explaining frontier communication systems to an elderly couple. Her daughter had embraced the project with unexpected passion, spending hours researching Pony Express operations and developing presentation materials that connected historical discoveries to contemporary communication technology. Mrs. Mitchell called Kate Turner, who had arrived for her weekly site visit representing continued state oversight. Today's visitor count hit 300 before noon. The partnership model is generating attention beyond anything we anticipated. The prosecutor had become valuable ally, ensuring regulatory compliance while helping navigate the complex intersection of historical preservation laws and development regulations. Her involvement provided ongoing reminder of accountability that kept all partners focused on balanced implementation. The governor's office called this morning, Turner continued. They're considering the Westbrook model as template for state historical partnership legislation. Your creation may extend far beyond this property. Sarah accepted this information with the same quiet composure that had carried her through confrontation with Harrington. Though the implications were significant, her focus remained on proper stewardship of what had been uncovered rather than recognition or influence. Any update on the arson investigation, she asked, changing the subject to matter that remained unresolved. Turner's expression tightened. Forensic evidence confirms professional methodology, but the perpetrator covered their tracks well. We have circumstantial connections to Meridian's security contractor, but nothing directly linking Harrington. The investigation remains active. The ranch house fire represented the partnership's darkest chapter, criminal destruction of historical structure that could never be fully recovered. Though Sarah had saved key documents, countless historical details had been lost forever in the flames. Rather than dwelling on this loss, the partnership had incorporated the burnt foundation into site development plans, preserving it as visible reminder of threats historical resources face and importance of preservation efforts. Interpretive signage would eventually tell the complete story, including the fire and its connection to the struggle for control of the property's historical narrative. Speaking of Harrington, Diana said quietly, his car just pulled into the parking area. Sarah turned toward the entrance, surprised by this development. Though Harrington remained on the partnership's oversight board, he had delegated day-to-day participation to Meridian executives, maintaining technical compliance with the agreement while minimizing personal involvement. The door opened, and Richard Harrington entered, his tailored business attire as incongruous with the site's dusty reality as it had been during their first meeting at the bookstore. Unlike that encounter, however, his customary confidence appeared diminished. His expression revealed man struggling with competing impulses, pride battling recognition, resentment confronting opportunity. Mrs. Mitchell, he acknowledged with formal nod, I came to personally review progress before next week's board meeting. The company has significant investment in this project's success. Of course, Sarah replied evenly. Dr. Miller can provide comprehensive update on the excavation. Diana has the latest visitor metrics and community engagement statistics. Actually, Harrington said, unexpected hesitation entering his voice. I was hoping you might provide perspective on the partnership's development. Your vision appears to be yielding results beyond initial projections. The subtle shift in his approach from dismissive opposition to reluctant acknowledgement spoke volumes about transformations occurring beneath his carefully maintained exterior. Financial success remained his primary framework, but awareness of broader values was beginning to penetrate decades of conditioning. I'd be happy to share my observations, Sarah responded, sensing opportunity in his request. Perhaps while viewing the main excavation, the conservation team is processing particularly significant findings today. As they walked toward the excavation site, uncomfortable silence stretched between them. History of conflict, creating conversational chasm neither seemed eager to bridge. Harrington broke it with unexpected question. Do you think my father knew what was buried here when he foreclosed on your great-grandfather's property? The directness of his inquiry caught Sarah off guard. For months, this question had remained subtext in their interactions, acknowledged in documentation but never directly confronted. The evidence suggests he did, she answered carefully. The 1961 survey report in his possession specifically identified this location as having historical potential. The systematic pattern of acquiring properties along historical routes indicates deliberate strategy rather than coincidence. Harrington nodded slightly, absorbing her assessment without the defensive reaction she might have expected earlier. I've been reviewing company archives since the partnership formation, he admitted. There are inconsistencies in the historical record that troubled me. They reached the excavation overlook, where teams below continued careful documentation of the underground chamber. The scale of the operation, with its specialized equipment, expert personnel, and meticulous protocols, illustrated the profound significance of what had been discovered. My father built his reputation on preserving regional history. Harrington continued watching the activity below. The Harrington Collection at the State Museum bears his name. His published works on Western expansion are still referenced by scholars. Yet these documents you discovered suggest different approach in his business dealings, one at odds with his public legacy. The personal struggle beneath his words was evident, some confronting, complex truth about father he had spent lifetime emulating. The partnership's discoveries threaten not just corporate interests but foundational narrative of family identity. Legacy is complicated, Sarah offered, recognizing the deeper dimensions of his struggle. Sometimes what we inherit requires reconsideration rather than mere preservation. Is that what you're doing with this partnership, reconsidering inheritance? Sarah considered the question, appreciating its unexpected insight. In a way, my grandfather's bitterness about losing this land shaped our family for generations. I could have continued that pattern, fighting Meridian with the same resentment he carried. Instead, this partnership creates something new from that difficult history. Below them, Professor Bennett called out instructions as team carefully extracted leather satchel from beneath stone slab, its contents potentially holding further revelations about the site's historical significance. The archaeologists estimate we've documented less than 40% of the artifacts so far, Sarah continued. Each week brings new discoveries that expand understanding of this region's role in national development. That knowledge belongs to everyone, not just your family or mine. Harrington's expression suggested internal calculation, businessman assessing value proposition in unfamiliar terms. The visitor numbers are impressive, he acknowledged. Meridian's heritage tourism projections are already exceeding forecasts, even with construction still months from completion. The economic benefits are real, Sarah agreed, but secondary to historical preservation and educational access. This model works because it balances multiple values rather than prioritizing only financial return. An unusual business philosophy, Harrington observed, though, with curiosity rather than dismissal, perhaps but one proving sustainable. The partnership has secured 3 national grants that would have been unavailable to purely commercial development. Academic institutions are contributing resources without compensation because they value knowledge creation. Local volunteers reduce operational costs while gaining educational opportunities. Different metrics of value working in concert rather than competition. Harrington fell silent, watching the careful extraction continue below. When he spoke again, his voice carried unfamiliar hesitation. My father died believing he had secured his place in regional history through the Harrington Collection and published works. He never acknowledged alternative methods behind acquiring many of those artifacts. And now, Sarah asked, sensing pivotal moment in their evolving relationship. Now I find myself questioning the foundation of our family legacy, he admitted. If achievement rests on suppressed history and exploitation, what is it actually worth? The vulnerability in this acknowledgement from man who had fought viciously to maintain control just months earlier revealed transformation more significant than any partnership agreement. Harrington was beginning to confront fundamental questions about value and legacy that transcended business calculation. Before Sarah could respond, commotion from the excavation drew their attention. Professor Bennett was calling urgently for the conservation specialists, excitement evident in his voice. They had opened the leather satchel and discovered contents that clearly held special significance. You should see this, Sarah suggested, leading Harrington down the reinforced pathway to the excavation floor. As they approached, Bennett looked up with expression of academic ecstasy that transcended his usual professional reserve. Letters, he announced, carefully lifting document protected in archival sleeve. Personal correspondence between station managers and what appears to be military intelligence officers. And this, he gestured to another document being prepared for preservation, direct orders regarding secure transport routes, signed by Abraham Lincoln himself. Harrington's composure faltered at the magnitude of this revelation. Whatever calculations he had been making about the partnership's value suddenly seemed trivial against historical discovery of this significance. Presidential documentation would qualify the entire site for National Historical Landmark status. Dr. Miller explained professional excitement breaking through his usual reserve. Beyond that, these communications may fill significant gaps in understanding how intelligence networks operated in Western territories during the Civil War. There's more, another archaeologist called from deeper in the chamber. We've found compartment with what appears to be coded intelligence reports. Some documents reference operations assisting escaped slaves reaching Mexico, confirming the Underground Railroad connections. Sarah watched Harrington's reaction, witnessing moment when perspective fundamentally shifts, when financial calculations and corporate strategy collide with historical significance that transcends monetary valuation. This is considerably beyond what our initial assessment suggested. He acknowledged professional understatement, failing to mask his genuine awe at what was being uncovered. History often is, Sarah replied simply. The National Historical Landmark designation ceremony took place 18 months after Sarah's initial purchase of the Westbrook farm. The property, now officially named the Westbrook Mitchell Historical Site, hosted over 500 attendees, including state officials, academic leaders, preservation experts, and community members, whose lives had been transformed by the partnership's development. Under large white tent erected near the main excavation area, the governor stood at podium adorned with both national and state seals. Behind him, glass cases displayed key artifacts from the Pony Express archives, now fully excavated, cataloged, and recognized as one of the most significant historical discoveries in the Southwest during the past century. What we celebrate today represents more than historical artifacts, important though they are, the governor stated, surveying the assembled crowd. We celebrate new model of collaborative preservation that honors our shared heritage while creating sustainable economic opportunity for this community. Sarah sat in the front row beside Ashley, now 16, and seriously considering archaeology as potential career path. Jack Sullivan and Deputy Rodriguez flanked them, along with Diana Gonzalez and Professor Bennett, the core team whose combined efforts had transformed abandoned ranch into nationally recognized historical site. The Westbrook-Mitchell partnership demonstrates what becomes possible when we move beyond adversarial relationships to shared stewardship, the governor continued. When private enterprise, academic expertise, government oversight, and community participation align around common purpose, we create legacy that serves both present needs and future generations. From her position, Sarah could see Richard Harrington seated with Meridian's executive team and board members. His expression remained carefully neutral, maintaining professional composure while adjusting to partnership that had evolved far beyond his original vision or opposition. The transformation of their relationship over 18 months had not been seamless. Harrington had alternated between genuine cooperation and attempted reassertion of control, between acknowledgement of historical significance and focus on commercial development. Yet incremental acceptance had emerged through repeated demonstration of the partnership model's success, not just in preservation terms, but in financial performance that satisfied even Meridian's demanding metrics. Most significantly, the arson investigation had reached unexpected resolution 3 months earlier, when Meridian's former security contractor had implicated Harrington in planning the ranch house fire. Rather than denying involvement, Harrington had negotiated settlement that included substantial personal contribution to ranch house reconstruction, fund establishment of historical preservations, scholarship, and public acknowledgement of responsibility, stopping short of criminal admission, but accepting ethical accountability that would have been unthinkable during their initial confrontations. This accountability, though reluctant and strategically calculated, represented evolution beyond anything Sarah had anticipated when purchasing the property. Harrington remained businessman focused on corporate interests, but demonstrated emerging recognition of responsibilities beyond bottom-line considerations. As the ceremony continued, various speakers highlighted different aspects of the partnership's significance. Academic researchers discussing historical revelations, economic development officials noting tourism, impact education, specialists describing curriculum integration and preservation, experts praising documentation protocols that had set new standards for archaeological recovery. When Sarah's turn at the podium came, she surveyed the gathering with quiet appreciation for journey that had brought them to this moment. The partnership now employed over 30 local residents, hosted thousands of visitors, monthly supported academic research teams from 12 universities, and had become model studied by preservation organizations nationwide. 18 months ago, I purchased this property for $300. She began, murmurs of appreciation rippling through those familiar with the story. I had no idea what lay beneath its surface, only connection to family history and sense that this land deserved better stewardship than it had received. She glanced toward the excavation site now protected by permanent structure that combined preservation requirements with visitor access innovative design that had already won architectural awards for balancing competing needs. What we discovered here goes beyond artifacts and documents, beyond buildings and tourism routes. We uncovered new understanding of our shared history stories of communication networks that connected isolated communities and intelligence operations that helped preserve the Union and freedom pathways that extended liberty's reach further than previously documented. Sarah paused, gathering thoughts about deeper significance of their work. Perhaps most importantly, we've demonstrated that history belongs to all of us, not as commodity to be owned and controlled, but as shared inheritance that gains value through accessibility rather than restriction. The Westbrook-Mitchell model works because it recognizes multiple forms of value beyond financial calculation, creating sustainable balance that serves diverse interests. As she concluded her remarks, Sarah acknowledged the many contributors whose combined efforts had transformed abandoned ranch into national landmark community volunteers, academic researchers, government partners, and even Meridian Development, whose resources and expertise had proven valuable despite the difficult beginning. Following the ceremony, reception beneath adjacent tent provided opportunity for conversations that reflected transformed relationships. Where adversarial positioning had once dominated collaborative discussion, now flourished genuine exchange rather than strategic maneuvering. Sarah found herself approached by Olivia Washington, who had emerged as Harrington's most significant counterbalance on Meridian's board. The elegant executive had become unexpected ally, recognizing partnership's value earlier than most of her corporate colleagues. Remarkable achievement, Washington observed, gesturing toward the celebration surrounding them. You've created something that transcends the usual preservation versus development conflict. It required everyone adjusting expectations, Sarah acknowledged, including me. I started with fairly rigid perspective on what should happen here. Washington smiled knowingly. That's what impressed the board most, your willingness to find balanced solution rather than pursuing vindication. It created opportunity for Harrington to adapt rather than merely oppose. Speaking of Harrington, Sarah said, noticing the CEO standing somewhat apart from the celebration, his evolution has been more substantial than I anticipated. Don't overestimate the transformation, Washington cautioned. Richard remains fundamentally who he's always been, strategic businessman protecting family legacy, but he's learning to calculate value in more sophisticated ways, recognizing that reputation and relationships sometimes outweigh immediate financial return. That's significant progress from someone who initially offered $75,000 to bulldoze a national treasure, Sarah observed. Indeed, Washington agreed. The partnership has been educational for all involved, including those of us who thought we understood value calculation. She glanced toward the main exhibition hall where visitors examined interactive displays explaining the site's historical significance. I've been meaning to ask, what will you do with your portion of the proceeds? The partnership's financial success has exceeded projections. The question touched on practical aspect of the partnership's structure that balanced historical preservation with sustainable operation. While primary emphasis remained on education and accessibility, the model generated revenue through carefully managed tourism publication rights and specialized programs proceeds distributed according to formulas Diana had negotiated to ensure all stakeholders benefited proportionally. The bookstore expansion is already underway, Sarah replied. We're adding dedicated historical section focused on Western frontier development with emphasis on perspectives traditionally overlooked in mainstream accounts. Beyond that, college fund for Ashley Mortgage Security and Foundation for Community Educational Programs. Comfortable sufficiency rather than excess. Washington nodded appreciatively. Balanced approach consistent with partnership philosophy. You've created something remarkable here, Mrs. Mitchell, not just historical preservation, but new model for collaboration that others are already beginning to emulate. As afternoon progressed toward evening, Sarah found moment alone near the original well that had first revealed the property's hidden significance. Standing where her journey began, she reflected on transformations 18 months had brought not just to the land, but to relationships, understanding, and community identity. Jack joined her comfortable silence between them, reflecting friendship that had deepened through shared challenges. After several moments, he spoke what both were thinking. Harold would be proud, not just of reclaiming the land, but what you've created from it. Sarah nodded, thinking of her grandfather, whose stories had planted seed for everything that followed. He always said this land held value beyond what others could see. I don't think even he imagined anything like this. Few could have, Jack acknowledged. You transformed potential conflict into collaborative vision. That's rarer than any historical artifact. Before Sarah could respond, they were joined by Ashley, excitement evident in her expression. Mom, the Lincoln Presidential Library representative, wants to discuss summer internship possibilities. They're creating special program focused on Western territorial documents from the Civil War period. Sarah embraced her daughter, recognizing how the partnership had expanded her horizons beyond anything they might have imagined when attending a science fair just 18 months earlier. Ashley's growth intellectual curiosity combined with emerging confidence represented personal dimension of the broader transformation the property had catalyzed. As sunset painted the desert landscape in golden hues, Sarah observed the gathering with quiet satisfaction. Deputy Rodriguez chatted with state officials about improved security protocols for historical sites. Diana discussed legislative initiatives with preservation advocates. Professor Bennett explained excavation techniques to fascinated high school students considering archaeology careers. Most notably, Richard Harrington engaged with National Historical Society representatives regarding expanded partnership possibilities for other Meridian properties. Conversation unimaginable during their initial confrontation. Though motivated by corporate interests, his willingness to explore collaborative models reflected evolutionary rather than revolutionary change. Businessmen beginning to recognize value dimensions beyond immediate financial return. 5 years after Sarah Mitchell purchased the abandoned Westbrook farm for $300, the Westbrook Mitchell National Historical Site hosted celebration marking completion of its permanent facilities. World-class complex combining archaeological preservation, educational resources, and community engagement. The Visitor Center's grand opening drew national media attention with PBS documentary team filming special on America's Hidden Histories, focused on revelations from the Pony Express archives and their significance for understanding Western territorial development during the Civil War era. Sarah, now recognized as pioneering figure in collaborative preservation, walked the beautifully landscaped grounds with Ashley home from her second year of college, where she studied historical preservation with emphasis on community engagement models. Hard to believe this was just empty desert 5 years ago, Ashley observed, gesturing toward bustling complex that now employed over 50 local residents, hosted research teams from across the country, and welcomed thousands of visitors monthly. The land was never empty, Sarah corrected gently. Its stories were just waiting to be uncovered and shared. They passed the reconstructed ranch house, now serving as administrative headquarters for the Westbrook Mitchell Foundation nonprofit organization Sarah had established to manage educational programs extending beyond the property itself. The building had been rebuilt using historical techniques and materials, incorporating salvaged elements from the original structure while adding modern systems disguised to maintain period authenticity. Inside the main exhibition hall, interactive displays explain the site's significance in multiple dimensions as Pony Express Station's Civil War intelligence outpost, Underground Railroad connection point, and nexus of frontier communication networks. Academic publications lined resource center shelves representing dozens of scholarly works based on artifacts and documents recovered from the underground chamber. Most significantly, the Multiple Perspectives Gallery presented history through diverse viewpoints, incorporating Native American experiences, Mexican borderland communities, African American freedom seekers, women's frontier roles, and immigrant contributions alongside traditional historical narratives. This innovative approach had earned national recognition for transforming how Western history was presented to public audiences. As evening approached, Sarah joined partnership board members on observation deck overlooking the property. Richard Harrington stood among them. His position within Meridian significantly evolved following Washington's elevation to CEO 2 years earlier. Though still influential within the company, he had shifted focus toward legacy-building activities, including establishment of historical partnership division that replicated Westbrook Mitchell model across multiple properties. The quarterly visitor numbers exceeded projections by 22%. He noted businessman's perspective, still his primary framework, despite gradual expansion of values. The partnership model continues demonstrating superior sustainability compared to traditional development approaches. The educational impact extends far beyond visitor metrics, added Professor Bennett, now director of the site's Research Institute. 17 universities have incorporated our primary source materials into their American history curriculum. The Lincoln Presidential Library Partnership has digitized over 80% of the documents for worldwide scholarly access. Sarah listened to these updates with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that successful collaboration required honoring diverse values rather than forcing singular perspective. The partnership worked precisely because it created space for multiple definitions of success: academic discovery, commercial, viability, community, benefit, and historical preservation, coexisting in dynamic balance. As sunset painted the desert landscape in amber hues remarkably similar to the evening she had discovered the Silver Eagle coin, Sarah reflected on transformations the property had catalyzed, not just physical development, but evolution of relationships, perspectives, and community identity. The Westbrook Mitchell model had spread beyond single property to influence preservation practices throughout the Southwest. Legislation based on its framework now governed historical site development across 3 states. Educational programs reached thousands of students annually, ensuring discoveries would inform future generations' understanding of their shared heritage. Most remarkably, the partnership had transformed adversarial relationship between Sarah and Harrington into functional collaboration that acknowledged their different priorities while finding common ground in sustainable preservation. Though never personal friends, they had developed a working relationship based on mutual respect for complementary expertise, pragmatic cooperation, replacing hostile opposition. Your grandfather told stories about this land having hidden value, Jack reminded her as they watched final tour group departing for the day. I wonder what he would make of all this. I think he'd be amazed, Sarah replied, though not by the artifacts or buildings. What would surprise him most is seeing a Mitchell and a Harrington on the same dedication plaque, finding a resolution to conflict that shaped both families for generations. Jack nodded thoughtfully. That might be the most valuable discovery of all, proof that even the most entrenched conflicts can transform into something constructive, given the right approach. As the darkness settled over the desert, lights illuminated pathways connecting the site's various facilities, physical manifestation of connections the partnership had established between previously separated interests. Where adversarial positioning had once dominated collaborative framework, now created space for diverse perspectives to contribute towards shared understanding of complex historical legacy. What had begun with Sarah's $300 purchase, motivated by personal connection to family history, had evolved into national model for historical preservation, educational access, and community development. The land had indeed held value beyond what most could see, not in gold or silver, but in historical truth that once unearthed belonged not to any individual or corporation, but to shared heritage that gained significance through accessibility rather than restriction. 10 years after her modest purchase at county tax auction, Sarah Mitchell stood at podium in Washington, D.C., accepting National Humanities Medal for pioneering collaborative approach to historical preservation. The citation recognized not just the significance of artifacts recovered at Westbrook Mitchell site, but transformative impact of partnership model that had revolutionized how historical resources were managed nationwide. What began as reclamation of family legacy, the citation read, evolved into discovery that expanded national understanding of our shared history while creating preservation framework that balances scholarly access, community benefit, and sustainable development. As Sarah accepted the medal, she reflected on journey from struggling widow purchasing seemingly worthless dessert to recognize innovator whose approach had influenced preservation practices across the country. The transformation extended far beyond personal circumstances to reshape relationships between academic institutions, development corporations, government agencies, and local communities, creating balanced collaboration where adversarial positioning had once prevailed. The Westbrook Heritage Partnership had become template, studied in graduate programs, replicated by preservation organizations, and incorporated into legislative frameworks governing historical site development. More significantly, it had demonstrated that value calculation, transcending purely financial metrics, could create sustainable models balancing diverse interests without requiring sacrifice of core principles. What Sarah Mitchell had discovered beneath that $300 patch of desert wasn't just historical artifacts, valuable though they were. She had uncovered framework for transforming conflict into collaboration, restriction into accessibility, and exploitation into stewardship legacy, extending far beyond physical property to reshape understanding of how shared heritage could unite rather than divide. The once worthless desert ranch had yielded treasure more valuable than gold, truth that illuminated forgotten pathways of American history while creating new paths toward collaborative preservation that would protect similar discoveries for generations to come. The Arizona sun sets once more over Westbrook Mitchell National Historical Site, painting the desert in the same golden hues that witnessed Sarah's first discovery years ago. What began as a widow's $300 investment became a $14 million historical treasure, but the true wealth was never measured in dollars. Some treasures remain buried until the right person comes along to unearth them, not to possess, but to share. Sarah Mitchell found more than artifacts beneath that weathered well. She excavated justice buried for 60 years, transformed bitter history into hopeful legacy, and forged unlikely alliances from entrenched opposition. The ranch house may have burned, but from its ashes rose something far more enduring, a new understanding of our shared American story, one that honors forgotten voices alongside celebrated heroes. The Harringtons lost their monopoly on history but gained a more honest place within it. The community reclaimed not just land, but connection to their own past. In the quiet corners of your hometown, what forgotten stories lie waiting? What old grudges might transform into unexpected partnerships? What seemingly worthless patch of earth might hold the missing pieces of history that future generations deserve to know? The most valuable treasures often rest in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage to look deeper.